So now we look at what does our ecosystem look like. We've heard throughout the day how there's all these different bits of the sort of sectors and the jigsaw that need to come together. But that needs to be in an environment that it can work together and collaborate and cross-fertilize ideas, because that's where innovation will come from. So it's great to have Tim Schoen from BioMed Realty, who's going to just set the scene for the panel to come after that in terms of what you see as an ecosystem. Tim.
Thanks, Jay. Well, the diehards are here. You know, you didn't sneak out and get the train back to London, so thanks for sticking around. Really excited to be here today. We've been really active the last couple of years during the pandemic, although Derek, where you go? There he is. Yeah. Well, Derek's very disappointed, and I'd just like to say that as a CEO of a company, we normally would have the U.S. and U.K. flags here, but Colleen made a mistake and didn't bring the flags. Totally kidding. We're really excited to be back after 3 years. We've been very active here. BioMed is, I affectionately say. So we've got a lot of our team here today. So I just wanted to introduce a few people because we have expanded our presence here the last couple of years. But BioMed at its core, we're the dumb real estate guys. Or the dumb real estate folks. We're the ones, usually the least educated folks in the room, but we're really good at building infrastructure and building lab space. We do it around the world for about 275 tenants, all the way from the largest deals. Although I like to give Colleen a hard time about not bringing the flag. She inked our largest deal last week in the company's history with Takeda and the other Cambridge, as I was telling Tony, the younger Cambridge. Across the pond. But we have our team here. I just want to introduce them quick. We have Marie Lewis, who's our Executive Vice President and Head of Integrations, very active on the acquisition front. We have our VP of Asset Management, Alex Schnipp. Maria Huntalis, who's responsible for us making sure that we showed up with materials, marketing and communications. Colleen O'Connor, our Senior Vice President, and what we like to call, she's the U.S. and Cambridge in the UK or the East Coast and UK markets. We affectionately call her the head of Cambridge Squared. And then Matt Smith, who's our Senior Director of Leasing here at Granta Park. And then Orestes. Man, I practiced all day too, Orestes. I'm just going to go with Orestes. I'm not even going to do it, Orestes. I won't do it to you. But anyway, the team, now you're going to see the second one, why I can't pronounce it. And I know I can do it because I practiced on the plane. But we've got our team expanded a lot. But we've been in the space a long time. We've done and built real estate from small buildings from 10 to 15, or really 20, 25,000 square feet to what is the largest campus in construction in the world in South San Francisco, where we're building AbbVie's Center of Excellence and Amgen's Center of Excellence in South San Francisco. But what's neat about the portfolio, when we were here 4 years ago talking to Derek and we did our first deal together, we were about an $8 billion company, and I think we're a good proxy for how the industry is growing across the world. Today, we're $24 billion, and we've focused on all the core life science markets in the country, in really the best markets in the world, in which Cambridge is one of them. And we'll talk about a little bit on the panel with Mike Ward about what makes, when people say an ecosystem, what really makes up an ecosystem, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the exciting part for us, working with folks like Orestes and his peers around our company, is that we're actually building state-of-the-market product. So some of the best lab buildings, but some of the most sustainable buildings in terms of how they use energy. We're fortunate enough, Bill Kane, who's our president, would have been here, but the US wouldn't let him out because he didn't have his passport, says we're the luckiest people in real estate because we get to work with some of the best scientists in the world, because it's not just their profession, it's their vocation. And the reason we can do what we do is, one, we have a portfolio. So when we work with companies and tenants and folks like you guys, if you come and take a space from us, you get 15 million square feet of options, not just the 5,000 or 10,000 feet that you take, because your needs are going to change over time. This asset class uniquely belongs in a portfolio so we can serve our clients' needs. And more importantly, we've got a fully integrated platform. We don't outsource things. We have people who are used to running mission-critical real estate. So we have folks that have run Gillette Stadium for the Patriots in the US, who have run hospitals for buildings that need to be up and running. Never more proud of that team during the last 2 years when we had COVID and they were able to help keep the buildings open. Although people try, you can't do research from your kitchen or your bedroom. So this work from home thing doesn't work so much for science. But the team kept the buildings open, kept the science moving. And happy to say now, if we take a step back, there's more targets in clinical research than there were pre-COVID. There's 6,000 targets around the world. That's up 65% from 5 years ago. And of that 6,000 targets, 4,000 of those are in smaller or medium-sized companies. So what happens here at Babram, and what happens at Grantham, what happens in Cambridge, is really where the cutting edge of science is. It's great to have the Abbeys and the Takedas and the Pfizers and the AZs of the world, but most of the small targets or new targets are with smaller companies. And people talk about an ecosystem. We'll talk about this a little bit more with Mike, but I won't get into it. But we did this a couple years ago, and we did this around the world. We looked at different markets, and it was amazing how the UK jumped out in terms of universities, R&D spend, the percent of GDP that it represented, the amount of life science companies, the graduates that were coming out, the STEM graduates that were coming out, and the UK had everything that the US did. And it's done nothing but accelerate in the 4 or 5 years since we came out and did a trade mission with Tony with San Diego and London 5 years ago. But this scorecard, there's very few places in the world that can boast this. Cambridge, US, Boston, Cambridge, South San Francisco, if you think about that, and if you just start with the research institutions. If you start in California and you think about San Francisco, you've got Stanford to the south and Cal to the north and UC San Francisco in the middle. In San Diego, you've got UC San Diego, you have the Salk, you have Sanford Burnham. In Boston, you've got MIT, Harvard, the Broad Institute. And if you think about, obviously, the top universities in the world are here in the UK. But more importantly, we're really excited. We bought what represents the opportunity to build 1 million square feet into this market and help improve the infrastructure here in Cambridge. We announced the deals. They were in the middle of COVID. It was 2021. And we did a joint announcement. We've never had a prime minister announce our transaction, so that was kind of exciting, although his reign has ended. So I'll say the former prime minister. So I want to let you know I'm 3 for 3. So when Brexit happened, and we were here for the vote, we just happened to be out here. We were on our way to the airport, said that they'd voted to exit, and the prime minister resigned. I thought, well, I better get to the airport before they close the airport. And then when May resigned, it was here. And then this morning when we woke up and I'm like, wow, the UK's never letting me come back. So I don't know if my passport will work anymore, but it was exciting because I think it showed the amount of effort and the amount of focus that the UK has on what is a jewel of an industry. And there's only really 2 places in the world, and it's the UK and the US. There are other places, Switzerland and things like that, but it really shows if you've got a government in a favorable regulatory environment, this industry will blossom and it will blossom over time. It'll take years, it doesn't happen overnight, but South San Francisco didn't happen it started in South San Francisco, if you think about it today, they like to call themselves the birthplace of biotech. That started in one industrial building with Genentech in South San Francisco. Today, it's home to almost all of the major pharmaceutical and biotech companies. Boston Cambridge has 19 of the 20. And if you walked around Cambridge 35 years ago, there's no way you would thought that Kendall Square would be the center of science. But more importantly, we're building all over the world, but more importantly, right here, we recently, with the support of the local communities, have been able to get a building on Granta, which we'll talk a little bit about how that fits into the picture, but 100,000 square feet of much needed infrastructure that Orestes is going to start on. And then Derek has been working very hard over the last year and a half to 2 years to expand the campus. And we're going to partner with Derek to hopefully get that building underway here in the next couple of months. So bringing some much needed infrastructure to the area. And also a project called CITP, which is land on the other, a little bit of ways here from Babraham, but allows us to build, like I said, almost 8 or 9 buildings in another 1 million square feet. One of the things that, we'll talk a little bit about, and this is where I think the partnership works a lot with the Babraham Research Campus, is there's a small incubator space which is much needed. There's an article today out in the FT where Joel Marcus, who's the CEO of Alexandria, who's the only other platform in the world that does life science like us, and he talks about startup space and how important startup space. Don't worry about how much square footage you have in New York. Just think about startup space. So you have that here, and when we talked probably 3 years ago, we talked about the need for scale-up space, and there's still a tremendous need for scale-up space. That's what we're trying to accomplish working with Derek. And then hopefully the larger campuses like Granta, when folks graduate and need more space, we can put them into existing buildings. The rest of the stuff, I'm just going to borrow your watch to tell you what time it is because you know these campuses. So, but anyway, that's sort of the overview. And I think the biggest thing that we noticed and when you compare the two, Cambridge, Mass versus Cambridge, UK, and South San Francisco, you see a lot of similarities. Large number of companies, big percentage of GDP, and also the number of employees. You see tens of thousands of employees in each of these locations. You see the market growth and the potential and the growth of the infrastructure to support the growth. And then as well as some of the sort of pivotal moments in each of these markets' history. But I think what's also important, especially in this environment, is the amount of VC funding. That's a key point of the growth in the infrastructure. The markets in the US, and I'm sure you followed it here, have been a washout. The NASDAQ Biotech Index, or the XBI, which is the non-market weighted index, is down almost 60%. The public markets will come and go. The good news is the tourists, as our friends in the US call them, the tourist investors are gone. They've moved through the space. But the serious investors and the VCs are still here and still in the space, and they're more sticky. We saw it in 2000 and 2001. We had the dot-com bust in the US, and then we had 9/11, and there was a very, very big slowdown in biotech. Then we saw it in 08 and 09 when there wasn't access to the public markets or capital for 18 months. The industry continued to grow and add employment. So even though we're in a period of time where the capital markets are not cooperating and capital is difficult to come by, there's a big and even larger group of VCs that will continue to advance the science and continue to move things forward. And if you notice in all three markets, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. And there's one that was a $3 billion fund that was just announced last week. So there's still money coming into the sector. It's still going to grow. The public markets will be shut down for a while. And until we get the next round of data, we've been hit with a bad rounds of data. So as people get from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, or to a new drug, as new data comes out, people will be able to raise money. We have a group, Scholar Rock, in Cambridge and Boston that just raised $200 million last week. So although there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, we'll come back on the other side. Those 6,000 targets will continue to get advanced, and the employment will continue to grow. People, at least in the US, we've been in this business a long time. We were always known as the other tech. It was always the big tech, the Apples, the the Googles of the world. Nobody really paid attention to life science till the pandemic came around. And then we're no longer the other tech, because people are asking now the question about, they're asking the question, what's the cost of a pandemic? There's a lot of discussion on drug pricing, and we can talk about that maybe a little bit, about what's important and why it's important to have a favorable regulatory environment. But people are asking the price, what's the cost of a pandemic? And the drugs that are being developed will improve people's lives. Going to the doctor and the hospital never get cheaper. And over time, the research becomes a public good. A lot of the medications we probably all take in this room are a generic. They come from basic research. So for us to participate in this ecosystem and actually help move society forward, that's what gets us excited about it. And this building and this real estate allows us to do some great things. We can put some amenities together. And for the first time, we're actually bringing the arts and science together in a building in Boston that I talked about earlier that Takeda's leasing, because that creative process to have been in this business in real estate for 30 years, to finally bring a performing arts center into a science building in the United States is pretty exciting in Boston. It's going to benefit the community, but it's that same creative process. Jonas Salk, who discovered the polio vaccine, he's got the Salk Institute in San Diego, was a big believer of bringing art and science together. So we're super excited to be doing that in the U.S. Anyway, that's enough on infrastructure, and should we get the panel? Thanks.